Hey everybody, Catalyst here. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are doing well. Today we are going to be doing some updated map rankings for all the maps in Battlefield 2042. With the release of the Hourglass rework 2 weeks ago, every original map in the game has now been fully reworked. Remember, I made a video almost a year ago at this point talking about why the maps in Battlefield 2042 were so problematic, and today we're going to find out just how much those maps have improved, if they have improved at all. Oh, I say we are going to find out today because there actually is a we today. For the last video, I reached out to Gravity to help me with the video, so I only thought it would be appropriate if we brought him on again so we can work on this together and get a bit more expertise and a differing opinion for this video. Thank you so much for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, Catalyst. It's good to be here. Glad to help you out.
The one thing that we want to get out of the way, we talked about this before we even started making this video. We want to kind of get the idea out there that not every single map in this game is just horrendously awful. There are maps in this game that do have some redeeming qualities. Now, granted, across the board, maybe they're not going to be the most favored maps in Battlefield history. They now kind of work in 3 different separate tier groups of maps.
Right. So normally when I do my best and worst map series, and there will be a forthcoming mid-tier map series, that's kind of how I kind of categorize all maps into those 3 things, and all Battlefield maps from across all platforms and all games fall into those 3 categories, with the vast majority of them falling into mid-tier. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, mid-tier maps can be absolutely hugely popular. There have been great maps that I would consider mid-tier that are just, you know, some of the most well-known maps in Battlefield history. Battlefield 2042 obviously had launched with some really, really bad maps, but they've all been reworked. And I would say that the majority of Battlefield 2042 maps now fall into that mid-tier category. And I think that that also follows, maybe we don't think of it that way, but also we are categorizing it based on that this game has fewer maps than what you would consider a standard Battlefield title.
Right. So for this video, we have decided to kind of divide and conquer. Gravity has elected to talk about all the maps on the Conquest Game mode. I have decided to take all the breakthrough layouts because I am more of a breakthrough player. Gravity, while he plays both, is more of a Conquest player. And we thought it was best to kind of divide and conquer because we also recognize that some of these maps play much, much better on one map, or one mode rather, than they do the other. And also for Conquest, some of them have 128 player and 64 player layouts. So kind of decided to rate all maps on both their game modes and then sandwich that into one big meta score. So guys, if you end up enjoying this video, make sure that you drop a like on it. Make sure to also leave a comment down below. It helps me in the algorithm. But tell me what you think of these maps. Do you agree with our opinions? Do you disagree? Do you think that all the maps in the game are still terrible? Make sure to let me know. Let's get into it. So I think the ideal place to start here, Gravity, is to start with the map that just got reworked, Hourglass. I'm sure that's what a lot of people are here for, considering it's the most recent one.
Yeah, to keep things short, Hourglass has had a very solid rework, though to call it great is a stretch. The Conquest version is heavily Russian side favored, owing to a terrain advantage and the overpass on their side. The map features 2 main base deployments per side, with vehicles only being able to spawn on the left. This makes the right side of the map great for infantry combat. It isn't a bad vehicle map, though improvements can be made. That being said, the awful designs of the main vehicle deployments on the left and clear line of sights make the railgun tank ridiculously powerful and outright stupid. It should be removed as an option on the map, really, if not the entire game.
Just remove it from the entire game.
The areas surrounding the main highway have very little cover, and more buildings around it would be great. The A1 flag design, I think, is pretty bad for both modes, as it leaves incredibly little cover on the flag itself for infantry and vehicles. It kind of just fades away into the desert, and vehicles and infantry spawning there just kind of spawn out in the middle of nowhere in the open. Lastly, it has some of the worst spawn point locations on any map in the game, placing players in the middle of nowhere without any cover in the hot zones and frequently in view of local vehicles. While the updated sections of the map are well implemented, additional cover outside of the flag zones just isn't there, and it makes the map frustrating to play on Conquest.
I don't think that many people were really expecting Hourglass to come out of the rework factory and just become a new fan favorite. I was expecting the breakthrough to be much improved, and I think it is improved. I said this to you on stream, but this is a map that DICE have somehow made better while also making it much worse in certain areas, and I think that directly applies to the breakthrough layout. I think one thing that has absolutely improved about the breakthrough layout in particular is the EPM, or the engagements per minute, which is good for the overall flow of gameplay. But the rework on breakthrough across the board really adds some problems that I personally consider to be more severe than just plain boredom and nothingness. And throughout the map now on the breakthrough layout, there is a downright brutal combination of head glitches and open sand, specifically the first sector that you talked about, Gravity, as not being so good. Also, the third sector is a bit of a culprit of that as well. You basically have two options throughout the rest of the map, which is flank into open nothingness, where very often there are vehicles waiting for you, or push up and directly at a bunch of head glitches, which the design of some of those buildings make them some of the strongest head glitches. Spawns, as we already kind of talked about, are also awful on the map, with a number of them being out in open sand or oftentimes in direct line of fire. Some of the spawns are so readable that the game will actually spawn defenders right in front of you. Like, there have been times where I know that a spawn is coming in and I'll pre-aim that angle, and then like 3 or 4 guys just pop up out of nowhere. The final sector has been combined from separate sectors into one sector. There was the objective in the park area, and then there was one further back into the skyscrapers. And I think that this change is okay, but I think I would have preferred it if they stuck to that 2-sector system, because what has happened with this final sector now is that the way that the map kind of guides you into attacking that sector is that you are kind of stuck in the middle ground far too often, and that middle ground can be a little bit difficult to play through, especially with all the spawns around the flag. So you find yourself constantly rotating in between those 2 points, and I think it would have been better if DICE sat down and said, okay, we're going to focus on this point here. We're going to make this a single sector. We're going to add a lot of cover to it, which they did to the Delta 1 flag, which is the flag closer to the park. They didn't really do so much to the other flag. I think if they separated them, it would have been a much more enjoyable end to the map. The map is definitely much improved, both on Conquest and in Breakthrough, but how much of that improvement? Like, I think we can probably agree that Hourglass in its original form was a 1 out of 10.
The original Conquest layout probably falls into either a 1 or a 2 category. I think the original Hourglass may have been a contender for the worst Battlefield map ever made. Yes. So it definitely has a rework. The rework is definitely a vast improvement. As for the Conquest playlist, I would rate both the 128 and 64 player sizes, both of which, of course, are the same map layout on this rework as well, a 4 out of 10.
3 out of 10.
Stranded was the second map added to 2042 post-launch, and it's arguably a bit of a disappointment compared to the first. Featuring the same flag layout in both the 64 and 128 player versions, it feels slightly too large for 64 players and definitely too small for 128. This is largely due to the verticality options on top of the ship, spreading players thin in 64 and being an obnoxious death trap in 128. Outside of the 2 interior ship flags, 4 others are spread to the 4 outside corners of the map. These are placed on the border of each team's deployment, so taking them doesn't feel rewarding. They get capped back almost immediately or have enemy players hiding and shooting from the deployment zones. The bottom 2 outside flags, B1 and E1, have minimal assets or design features, and for a map this tightly packed seems like a weird choice. Stranded is also the only map in 2042 to feature multiple tornadoes concurrently, which is just insane nonsense. That being said, if you can find areas with the right enemy count and not be positioned to get shot in the back every 2 seconds, the map does feel pretty good.
Stranded, for me, I think is one of the better breakthrough maps in the entire game. I think the Conquest may be a bit of a disappointment, especially considering the hype that it had going into it. If you remember, Gravity, that the hype going into that map was like, oh my gosh, we are finally going to get a faster CQC experience, and it was kind of half that. It was a little bit half-baked, so it was a little bit disappointing. The breakthrough, on the other hand, in my opinion, is quite good, assuming that the attackers don't get completely stuffed on the first sector. In a game that frequently tries to replicate the chaotic infantry combat of an Operation Metro or an Operation Locker, Stranded, I think, is the most successful attempt at that. There are multiple flanking routes above and around the boat that keep the round from becoming this endless bashing your head into a wall that some of the other maps do become. The interior sectors offer some pretty good CQC gameplay for this game's standards and deliver a lot of opportunities for that big YouTube flank, which I think a lot of people can enjoy and appreciate. With that said, I think the main knock on this map is that it's certainly not immune to 2042's explosive spam problems, and if you're going to have complaints about explosive spams, it's going to be here. And in my opinion, we've talked about this in separate conversations as well, this is why there is no Metro style map in the game. Like this is exactly why this would not work well, like a Metro would work well in the game. And you can see it in pockets all over the place, but specifically in the inside of the boat on Stranded. The first sector, we've talked about a little bit already, is a bit of a blight, in my opinion, on what is an overall, really good breakthrough map, as it forces the attacking team to kind of take the high ground in the hills above the point to gain any type of map control, and you have to kind of work your way down. Otherwise, players are herded into containers that are an explosive spam fest, or if you try your luck on the downward side of that hill, you're exposed to snipers that are, for some reason, allowed on the boat. So, I mean, that aside, Stranded, for the most part, is a pretty fun experience from an infantry standpoint. It's also the only infantry-only map in the game on Breakthrough, as far as I remember. So it's really good to above average, depending on the level of explosive spam that you get.
I would rate Stranded a 5 out of 10.
8 out of 10.
The fourth DLC map, and one which came as a slight disappointment following some disingenuous marketing. Flashpoint was teased on multiple occasions as featuring numerous underground sections, and it gave players hype that a close quarters, interior, underground style map was in the cards. Turns out it was just one big long tunnel. Even other parts of the map with interiors ended up being a single connecting hallway. So yeah, a bit of a letdown. The map features 7 flags and once again has the same layout in both 64 and 128 players. The layout is very reminiscent of Spearhead in its linearity, and this makes it a frequent walking simulator for players. The G1 and A1 flags near the deployment are rarely touched in Conquest, as the center flags provide the majority of activity. The refineries of E and C have a lot of structures nearby, but going atop of them makes you an easy target for flanks. Enemies below, snipers, vehicles, practically anything. While the D1 flag is underground and features easy access back to the surface, it's kind of a boring flag. I have little issue with the majority of the flag design on this map, but the spawn points around them are disastrous. Additionally, the map's terrain does it no favors, particularly near the center with high hills and plenty of large rocks, making it a nest of camping snipers and rockets immune from below. The 64-player experience of Flashpoint can be a bit slow, while the 128-player version will leave you screaming about cover and spawn points. But overall, it's a solid design in need of mild changes.
Flashpoint is a map that really could have been so good, but really stumbled on its way to home plate. A lot of Flashpoint's problems in Conquest transfer over to the Breakthrough layout, especially as it pertains to the terrain around the objectives. In Conquest, you can avoid some of the more difficult to traverse sections of the map. In Breakthrough, you end up having to go right into them, and it creates choke points that you either need to slog through with smoke or try to go around with little cover available to try and protect you from the rat-infested hills that you were talking about that's literally littered with vehicles and camping snipers. This map is just another example of one that I think would play much better if the playable areas, the playable boundaries were tightened ever so much. That said, I think the first 2 sectors have a lot of good qualities to them. It's the back half of the map that houses most of my complaints. The objectives are complete and utter fishbowls, with defenders being able to rain down pretty much everything in the game can just be absolutely pummeled down on the objectives in mostly the last sector and the second to last sector. So there's no real way for attackers to get map control, at least not without a heavy ticket death rate. The last sector, for the same reason, is practically indefensible from the defense's perspective. The fact that the map does not really even attempt to include the underground portion of the map is also a huge waste of potential. The map itself has a lot of interesting space and objective design. Like, I think a lot of people could agree with the statement that in terms of the way that the map looks and the geometry around the map, like, Flashpoint is pretty unique. For this game. It's just a shame that everything around it brings it down so heavily. It's a very interesting map. It's just, unfortunately, the way that DICE terraformed and designed the terrain around it just really brings the map down. And oftentimes I find myself ending the match frustrated after my team has blown 300 tickets on the 4th sector. So
6 out of 10.
6 out of 10.
Renewal is a bit confounding, because it strikes me as the easiest let's make a ground vehicle map in the game. Even post-rework, there are still a lot of open areas in the fields. I don't necessarily think these are a bad thing, since it still has more cover and structures on it than Battlefield 3's Armored Shield. But the amount of helicopters on it needs to be slightly reduced, and, once again, the rail tanks need to be deleted. Overall, this fairly large map is enjoyable to play, but is slightly Russian favored after the rework, as the majority of flags are on their side of the wall. Not that this makes it impossible for a coordinated US team to dominate. The wall is a pretty good map element, though I really wish the doors wouldn't be locked shut during the entire freaking duration of a tornado, and I wish holes could be blown in the wall itself.
Wait, the doors on the wall are completely shut when a tornado goes through?
They completely, the doors that automatically shut during the entire duration of a storm, and they cannot be destroyed or opened any other way, and it completely stumbles the flow of the map.
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
The wall defines the 128 player version of the map, with the majority of both teams lining up on each side of each gate for a grind which is actually fairly enjoyable. What would make the map far better is if certain sections of the wall could take damage and in time be destroyed, creating a more dynamic experience.
I think destruction like that is something, I think you would define it almost as like a character of a map. Like, destruction like that on the map's features, I think would be so cool. And it's just missing across the board.
And I don't think it should be like something that, like, it shouldn't be like a Caspian border wall where like 3 tank shells take it down. I think this is the type of thing where if you've got 128 players, I think it should be a significant amount of HP, but over the course of, 600 tickets, certain sections of it'll be whittled away. I think that'd be cool. The E1 and E2 flags of the Plant Nursery and Research Center are also really cool and detailed. Like the solar station, I just wish it had a larger presence on the center of the map. As far as Conquest goes, Renewal is actively one more enjoyed than hated. It just needs a couple of adjustments.
Renewal and Flashpoint share a lot of the same issues for me when it comes to their breakthrough layouts. However, I think Renewal breakthrough is substantially worse for one key reason, and that's the objective design. I mean, you and I just gushed about how good the actual objective design was of Flashpoint, and I don't think that Renewal has that design in it, at least where the breakthrough objectives are. The first sector in the solar station, much improved as a playable area, but the defensive flag spawns are absolutely atrocious. On that sector, the rest of the map layout is a bit of a slog with horrible player boundaries mixed with awkward objective design that can be an absolute crapshoot for defending vehicles. If I had not played this map since it was reworked, you might be able to convince me that it wasn't even touched at all. The most reworked section of the map, which is the checkpoint on the grassy side of the wall, that really hardly plays a factor in the map whatsoever, and I would have loved if it actually did play a bigger role. Which, speaking of that, the third sector is largely characterized by long rotations between those two flags where there's very little cover, and oftentimes you'll be pestered by vehicles that, as we talked about earlier, could be called up on the research labs in the next sector. You'll be pestered by railgun sniper fire. It's not fun rotating between those two flags. so you better hope that your Condor pilot is pretty competent. Renewal is another prime example about what could have been if the playable boundaries were tightened up. Renewal is the recipient of the Why the Fuck Are Enemies Allowed Over There award that a few maps have received and will receive in this video. Sometimes your only hope, as I said, is that your Condor pilot is competent. Otherwise, if you get to the last sector, you're likely to win, as defenders get the raw end of the deal, being forced to not only run up a hill, but into a building and up multiple flights of stairs to even contest the point. So, sometimes it can be a little bit dicey in there, but most of the time, once the attacking team gets to that sector, call it curtains. It's very hard for defenders to back up there. So what do you think? It seems like you like Renewal. You probably like Renewal a little bit more than I do, but what's your ranking here?
In terms of the Conquest, both 64 and 128, they both have their minor issues, but overall, it's a solid map experience on Conquest. I give it a 6 out of 10.
4 out of 10.
Discarded went from being one of the largest, blandest, emptiest walking simulators to fast-paced and intense following its rework, though still a bit environmentally unappealing. Flag distances, both in the 64-player and 128-player versions, were tightened and altered, making for a far better game experience. The combat in, atop, and around the dilapidated cargo ships is fun and intense, but frustrated by the continual poor respawn locations out in the open around the vessel, one of the largest unfixed complaints about the original design. Despite the new closer flag layout, the open space and flatter terrain makes it a really good vehicle map, with enough cover for infantry to counterattack. The lone vehicle issue remains, you guessed it, the stupid railgun tank, which can sit on the US side of the map near the new scrapyard flag and hit newly respawning Russian vehicles without obstruction. Overall, Discarded is now a very enjoyable map and one of the best on all modes, though it struggles with spawn locations and lack of a few pieces of cover in the areas between flags.
I agree with you. I think the Discarded is probably the best rework out of all of them. In terms of what DICE started with, especially, to what it turned into, it's a pretty stark difference. If Hourglass was a 1 or 2 out of 10, I think original Discarded might have been like a 2.5 to a 3. Like, it was not that far behind Hourglass for worst map in the game, in my opinion. So now, instead of running 500 meters from the attacker's deployment to the first sector and breakthrough, this time you start right into the action, which I really appreciate. That's also a similarity in the Hourglass rework that we didn't really touch on. Discarded's new breakthrough objectives are all packed with cover and designed well enough to not be a pain to play around. Getting to those sectors is still a massive undertaking sometimes on breakthrough, and in some cases there are some nasty natural pinches with the map terrain and some crossfires that you will not get through without smoking, which good luck getting Battlefield players to run smoke instead of grenades, regular frag grenades sometimes. With that being said, I think the first half of the map feels a lot more reworked than the second part, which on breakthrough still makes the final run in the mud to the smaller boat objective a little bit frustrating. Other than that, there's not really else much to say or something that is worth mentioning. The map is improved, but it's still a fair bit of meh. So it looks like, I think we could probably agree that this is the best rework in the game.
I would grant Discarded Conquest a 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10.
This is here. I started. Here we go. Yeah.
Oh no.
I started getting a little detailed. Breakaway is strange to say the least. The rework definitely left this extremely large design in a far better state, but it feels like it could have been so much better. A victim of the rework was the radar station isolated high in the mountains, and thank goodness that's gone. Used in the trailer as a skydiving or wingsuit launch platform, it nevertheless existed as a forced game element to try and emulate the Damavon Peak experience. The new 128-player layout, with 8 flags and substantially tightened distances between them, is much improved, faster, and more intense. This is especially true of the objectives of A1, A2, C1, and C2. While they are the best on the map, with fairly quick jumps and more cover between, they are also frequently swarmed with the majority of both teams fighting for control, and it gets a little chaotic. The frozen glacier high above, still able to provide a wild sense of verticality, seems imbalanced to the US side given the map layout. Only one flag remains up on the ice, E2, with a new flag, E1, set in the icy crevasse at the site of the downed condor. Both of these flags are fairly isolated. Fuck me. The D1 flag in the bottom right corner isn't too bad, but its purpose seems to be relegated to be the, oh, I need to get back to the oil rig flag, or the, we finally took the oil rig, I'll head to D1 because there's nothing left objective. Arguably, the worst flag to be at on 128 is B1, as despite the cover on the point, getting there leaves you exposed to various high ground angles, and even near the flagpole, you are a sitting duck in most cases. The 64-player version of Breakaway restricts the battle to 5 flags, and thankfully they are the best from the larger layout. The 2 large oil cisterns, now the C flag on this version, has a gargantuan capture radius. And I gotta say, as frustrating as it might seem, is actually a great thing. It focuses battles around 2 large objects, creating funnels for huge groups of players to grind. The explosions of these drums is pretty cool, and not worth the frustration of getting mad if you die to it. I mean, hey, you can't miss it being on fire. It also creates a solid midpoint for the map, and when players finally pull away from fights on the gimmies, either at the research base or the oil rig, it makes for a solid clash. Most ground vehicles, especially heavy armor, have a pretty bad time on both map variants, due to the oil rig and plentiful ice below. Overall, the current layouts of Conquest Mode Breakaway are unique, fairly balanced, and worth playing.
As for Breakthrough on Breakaway, it's a little bit conflicting to me. Over time, though, I tend to frown on. I tend to not like this rework the more and more I play it. In terms of some of the other maps in the game, I think you nailed it pretty good. This is one of the more playable reworks of the bunch. It's certainly a unique map in terms of the type of maps that you'd be finding in this game, and I'll probably find myself playing it more than re-queuing. With that said, I think the main thing that I can summarize how I feel about this rework is that I wish DICE took the global warming approach to this map. I think that they should have either completely eliminated the glacier or shrunk it massively to bring it more in line with the rest of the map. And the fact that DICE tried to make this gigantic glacier a working part of the map, I think is what brings it down. It's my opinion that DICE should have worked around the old 64-player Breakthrough layout instead of the 128-player layout, and as such, the work that's now done on the last sector of the layout is good, and I think that's arguably the best sector on the map. It's really enjoyable to fight around the carrier facility, the barracks. I love that sector if I ever get to that sector. Breakaway is the unrivaled king of horrendous playable map boundaries on Breakthrough. There are plenty of occasions where I will actually be on a flank and I'll get shot by somebody even further out on the flank than I was in an area that I didn't think was going to be accessible. The second sector is a total joke for defenders and is impossible to defend mentally. When I'm defending on this map and I get to that sector, my mind is already on the oil rig. And speaking of the oil rig as a playground, in my opinion, very unique, very fun to play around. Getting to that objective, though, is a pain, and again, without a competent Condor pilot, it might be a rough time for you. Spawns on the oil rig are also pretty finicky, with some of the spawns even on the C1 flag being so bad that you can force people to spawn directly into that smaller room that's in the capture zone. I really wish that the layout spent more time in the researchers barracks and the storage facilities that are currently in the last sector. Again, kind of just going back to my thoughts that I think if they focused more on developing that side of the map instead of focusing on the glacier, that Breakaway might just play better as a map in both game modes. I mean, you already said that in a 64-player version, some of the better flags are on that side of the map anyway, so I really wish that they took the global warming approach, shrunk the glacier. I think the flow would be much better. It's already an aesthetically pleasing map to look at.
I would give the Conquest versions of Breakaway a 6 out of 10.
5 out of 10. We're about to actually We're about to tear this map a new fucking asshole. Actually, if we tore this map a new asshole, that might be better than some of the layout that it has currently.
Kaleidoscope, to me, seems like the biggest "what are we doing here" map of 2042. From its original design to its rework, it has just never had a good map flow, terrain detailing, or decided whether it wants extreme verticality or not. There is a large data center in the center and a few skyscrapers at each corner. These skyscrapers are flag locations meant to provide that base jump feel and wingsuit launch point, but they feel forced, and are largely just constantly harassed by nightbirds and gunships. The 128 version is just wide with empty spaces or boring objectives, including the redesigned B flags, which work far better in the Breakthrough variant. There is also a major tunnel underneath the center of the map, which never sees any action to the point that I think most players forget it's even there.
I forgot about it.
On 64-player Conquest, the map is oriented around the eastern half, consisting of the data center, the concrete art bowls in the north, and the skyscrapers to the south. The data center, as it is in the Breakthrough mode, is simply the lone highlight of the map. It is extremely unique, aesthetically cool, and the inside structure is fun to play. However, leaving it to go somewhere else, or dying and needing to walk all the way back to it, is a major drawback. I hold that Kaleidoscope is the worst map in the game. Its rework did little to address the concept or the empty space. Areas of sparse cover remain in many locations as bushes and road walls are just not enough. Spawn points around the flags remain awful, and traversing to a new objective is liable to get you shot from a rooftop or helicopter passing through. Conquest on Kaleidoscope is simply a painfully forgettable experience.
I think you can really tell that this was one of their earlier reworks just based on how much effort went into. Not to say that they didn't try, right? But you could tell that, like, along with Manifest and Renewal in some aspects, that they didn't really do enough. Whereas Conquest continues to lack that meaningful improvement or direction, I think Breakthrough on Kaleidoscope is improved, and in some cases it's enjoyable. The first sector is a pretty massive improvement, especially in comparison to both the 128-player and 64-player layouts that existed prior, and it's not really much of a debate here. I mean, even the data center is a pretty enjoyable sector, though the moving of the objective to the second floor instead of having it be on the first floor is a questionable decision for me. I think I prefer the first floor. It's aesthetically much cooler. And, you know, the way that they have it now, it allows some of those smaller vehicles to camp the entrances to the capture zone, so you'll very frequently see a Ram there or a Mav. That's something that you'll come across very often. The travesty of this map is its final sector, and it completely butchers anything positive going for Kaleidoscope. The fact that in an objective inside of a skyscraper with only 3 entrances to it not only was carried over from the previous layouts, but made it through the map rework and was not tweaked in any meaningful way to make it more playable, absolutely reeks of incompetency and laziness, which is why I kind of hold that opinion that you could see that this was their first map rework and see that it was just not up to par to the rest of them. It's awful. It's a very typical experience for attackers to have full tickets heading into the sector and lose every single one of them because of the design. Now, attackers winning the map is not a condition for the map to be rated highly, obviously, but considering that this experience, generally speaking, is not fun for either the attacker or the defender going through it, it deserves every bit of criticism it gets. There are plenty of other options and ideas that could have worked with some effort, but DICE chose this. And yeah, Kaleidoscope is a pretty pathetic map, as it is.
Conquest 64, 4 out of 10. Conquest 128, 3 out of 10.
Breakthrough, 5 out of 10. And that'll be the end of part 1, ladies and gentlemen. Originally, the idea was to keep this under 45 minutes, but seeing as we're only halfway through the maps, it's very clear that that's not happening. So there will be a part 2 to this video, so if you enjoyed it and you enjoyed our analysis, make sure that you drop a like, and if you enjoyed the video just that much, subscribe for more content. Part 2 will be out in a couple of days, so I hope you're looking forward to it. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Catalyst, and I'll see you all another time.